Hey everyone! So today we are diving into an architectural style that honestly just finds that perfect sweet spot between two extremes. It's powerful, it's flexible, and maybe most importantly, it is incredibly practical. We are talking about service-based architecture.
So here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll set the stage with a problem pretty much everyone runs into, the architect's dilemma. Then we'll introduce service-based architecture as a solution. We're going to break down its anatomy, see how flexible it can be, weigh the pros and cons, and then wrap up with the big question. When should you actually use it?
All right, let's kick things off with a situation that I'm sure feels familiar to a lot of you. It's the architect's dilemma. It's that moment where you have to choose the fundamental path for your entire application.
And that choice, more often than not, boils down to this one huge question. Do you build a single, all-in-one monolith, or do you jump headfirst into the complex, distributed world of microservices? It is a massive architectural crossroad.
And this is that classic rock and a hard place scenario, right? On one side, you've got the monolith. It's just so simple to get started with. But as it gets bigger, man, it can turn into this rigid, tangled mess that's a nightmare to scale. Then on the other side, you've got microservices. They are amazingly scalable, for sure, but they bring this storm of complexity, they're expensive, and the operational overhead is just a lot. So, what do you do?
Well, maybe the answer isn't about picking one of the extremes. And this is where our hero kind of enters the scene. Let's talk about service-based architecture, a hybrid approach that is just wonderfully pragmatic.
So, what is it exactly? Well, think of it as a distributed style that kind of cherry-picks the best ideas from microservices. It's designed to give you that awesome flexibility and modularity, but without totally drowning you in complexity and cost. It's the sensible middle ground we've been looking for.
At its core, the basic layout is actually pretty simple to wrap your head around. You've got your user interface, which is deployed all on its own. Then you have just a handful of remote, larger services. We call them coarse-grained domain services. And this part is really key. They usually all talk to a single monolithic database.
Okay, let's peel back the layers here. Let's really look at the anatomy of this thing and see what makes it tick. How does it all fit together?
So the service in service-based architecture is a domain service. And let's be super clear, we're not talking about those tiny little microservices that do one small thing. No, these are coarse-grained. Each one is a pretty significant, independent piece of the application. Think of something like the entire checkout system or the user profile management, and it gets deployed all on its own. And check out the scale we're talking about here. You're not wrangling hundreds and hundreds of tiny services. A typical application built this way will have somewhere between, say, 4 and 12 of these domain services. It's a number you can actually manage without losing your mind. And here it is again, that really crucial point. These services almost always share one database. Now this is a huge deal. Why? Because it means you get to keep your traditional ACID transaction capabilities. Now that's a fancy way of saying you can guarantee that a complex operation, like moving money from one account to another, either happens completely or not at all. There's no messy in-between state where the money just vanishes. And that makes data consistency way, way simpler than in the microservices world.
Okay, so let's move on, because this architecture isn't super rigid. It can actually bend and adapt to different needs. This is definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of solution.
So to make this a little more concrete, let's imagine an electronics recycling company. You can instantly see how their business breaks down into these clean, separate domains. You've got quoting for customers, receiving for when devices arrive, assessment to check their condition, accounting for payments, an item status portal for customers, and finally, the actual recycling process. Every single one of those is a perfect candidate for a domain service.
And this is where you see the flexibility in action. You don't have to be stuck with one UI or one database. You can federate them, split them up. You could have one UI for your customers and a totally separate one for your internal team. You could even split the database into different security zones, like one for public-facing data and another more secure one for internal operations. This gives you a massive boost in security, scalability, and fault tolerance.
Of course, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? No architecture is a silver bullet. Everything has its trade-offs. So let's get real and do an honest analysis of this architecture's strengths and its weaknesses. If we look at the scorecard, you can see where this style just nails it. It gets really high marks, 4 out of 5 stars, for the things that make developer teams happy and productive: agility, testability, and deployability. But look at the other side of the coin. Scalability and cost are rated a bit lower. See, this isn't designed for Google-level infinite scale, and that's intentional. You're trading some of that top-end scalability for day-to-day practicality.
So what's the biggest challenge? What's the catch? Well, it all comes back to that shared database. Because so many services are plugged into it, a single change to the database schema could potentially send ripples out and impact every single one of your services.
But you've got options for how to handle this. There's a risky way and a smart way. The risky approach is to have one giant shared library for your entire database schema. Any little change in there and boom, you have to redeploy everything. The smart approach, though, is to use federated shared libraries. You basically break up the database logically, and each service only knows about the library for its little slice of the data world. A change to accounting data only forces the accounting service to redeploy. It is so much cleaner.
Okay, we've covered a ton of ground. Let's bring it all home and finally answer that million-dollar question. Is this architecture the right call for your next project?
So here's the deal. This architecture really shines in a few key scenarios. It is a fantastic fit if your team is already into domain-driven design. You know, that whole practice of modeling your software around the real-world business domains. It's also perfect when keeping those traditional ACID database transactions is a non-negotiable top priority. And of course, it's ideal when you need good modularity, but you just don't want to sign up for the chaos of full-blown microservices. It's all about that balance.
There's this amazing analogy from the source material that just sums it all up. Choosing a super complex architecture for a simple problem is like owning a Ferrari just to sit in rush hour traffic every day. I mean, sure, you have the power, but what a complete waste of resources and money. The whole point is to pick the right tool for the job.
And that really brings us to our final question for you to think about. Is the best architecture always the one that's the most powerful and scalable on paper? Or is it the one that's the most pragmatic for your team, your budget, and what your business actually needs? Powerful versus pragmatic. You know, sometimes the most pragmatic choice is the most powerful thing you can do for your business. Thanks for tuning into this explainer.